Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today's episode is something awesome. It's something important. There is nothing more important than spreading the word of God, especially to those who need it. And it's going to be great. So I have with me James W. Smith, a man who, like many of you, has gone through many trials in his life and has at one point lost almost everything, if not everything, but he has turned that all around and he is here to help you who are all without hope find that hope and recover. Mr. Smith, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
I am James W. Smith. I'm a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and now a retired pastor of 32 years from the same church. I was retired as a pastor, but not from the ministry. Stayed out for about 6 months, and my home church lost her pastor abruptly. And so I'm serving my home church now as an interim pastor and I've been there for over, as a matter of fact, just a little over 1 year. I'm talking to you from Durham, North Carolina.
Yeah, I can't speak for God's will, but it seemed like he wanted to keep you in the ministry a bit longer. You thought you were getting at but that's how it works. Sometimes, you think your calling is somewhere else and then God redirects you. So what I want to talk about is a little bit about the past, a little bit of the negative side. You talk about being a gambler, specifically a compulsive gambler, afraid of failure. Could you please elaborate on what that means?
Well, I put it this way. I am a one who grew up in a small town, Lewisburg, North Carolina, out in the rural area, an only child to a single mom. Finished high school, went off to college, went to law school, got out of law school, passed the bar at age 26. The only and first African American lawyer to practice in my hometown. At the time, I was the youngest African American lawyer practicing in the state of North Carolina. I began playing poker with other lawyers, bondsmen, barbers, professionals in the area. We had a little circle. At first, I was pretty good. I won money, I knew when to get up. As those saying say, I knew when to hold, I knew when to fold. But it eventually got the best of me to the point where I fell in love with the game. I began to go downhill. And after about 10 years of practice, all that I accumulated, I lost. My first wife, we separated after 5 years, all because of my gambling. And I became so depressed and to the point where I was almost to the point of committing suicide. But I didn't go through that. I think my mom was the reason for that. And I eventually ended up in a little town about 10 miles out of Henderson, where I was practicing law. I had a law office in Henderson, Lewisburg, and Oxford at the time. So I was in Oxford. I rode over to Oxford from Lewisburg, got me something to eat at a restaurant, and kind of just depressed, but looked out of the window and I saw the CCB Bank. And of course, mind started roaming. I didn't have anything. I had lost all my money, lost my properties, my wife, and everything. And so I was just thinking and thinking how I could kind of recoup. And look, the bank is right here. And if I could just get my hands on 50 to $100,000, I could pay off all my debts, go back to my office like nothing happened. Crazy thinking now. So I'm not trying to, butter this up because it was crazy. It
Yeah.
was, but that's what happened. And so I eventually, after riding around, I eventually came to the point I said, heck with it, get caught or not. pulled right up to the bank, went in, and said, "Stick up, give me your money." They gave me a bag of money. I ran out. And of course, from that point, a lot of interesting things happened, kind of funny in retrospect. Now that I think about it, I got stopped twice by once by a police officer that knew me very well, and he couldn't believe I was crying. I had stopped on the side of the road, and so he just asked me what was going on, what happened, how did I feel, and I told him I'm okay. He said, "Okay, well, go ahead on." He obviously didn't believe that it was me who had gone to the bank. Got stopped about another maybe mile later by highway patrol, and when he came up to the car, by that time, the same police officer who knew me well came by and said, "I just stopped him. He's okay." And then Highway Patrol told me to go ahead on him. So I'm saying this because it was kind of funny in retrospect. It wasn't at the time. I realized then that it was over. So I went to my former partner's off because we had separated, gone our separate ways at that time. And that's where I was actually arrested after I had called my lawyer up, told him what had happened. And they took me, and of course, we went to the back to Oxford, and I was arrested, placed under a $100,000 bond, and of course, stayed in jail that night. The following day, I went to court with a hearing because they thought that I had had a mental breakdown, and I was ordered to go to Dorothy Dix Mental Hospital for 6 weeks of observation. Stayed there for 3 weeks, came out, and of course stayed out until about 6 months before I went back to court. That's the early part of what happened.
Yeah, and so what part did faith play in all of this? Because were you raised within the faith, or, was it to a point in your life where because of all the bad things going on, you kind of just put the faith to the side, and then after everything, the consequences came, that's when the faith reformed, or how did that process go in terms of your faith?
Good question. I can answer that. I've always been in church. I've always considered myself a Christian. Didn't always go to church like I should have. My mom was very committed every Sunday. As a matter of fact, even when I was gambling, I would always leave because I knew my mother didn't drive and she wanted to get to church. So I would make my effort to get back to take her to church, even if I went back to my poker game. That was just the way I was. But when young growing up, I was always in church. My mom took me to church every Sunday. I was in Sunday school. So when I was at Dorothy Dix Mental Hospital, when it's there for this observation, my faith kicked in. It was just like I began to start thinking about why am I here? What caused me to get into this place? You know, why did I do what I did and get it? I lost my law practice. All this was going through my mind. And so my faith just told me that I could make it. I needed to just accept what had happened, get it behind me, and start over again, give up all of that stuff that I was doing. So I gave up my gambling, no more poker, all my drinking that I was doing at the poker games. I said, this is it. So when I got out of Dorothy Dix Miller Hospital, I was totally fine. It's something about me that just made me at ease. I was ready to face what I knew was coming. I had no problem with that. And so when I went in after about 6 months, this all happened in July. It was January when I pled guilty, and about 6 months. At that time, I had actually accepted ministry. Matter of fact, this was interesting because I really preach in the missionary Baptist church, you have to do what we call an initial sermon. I did my initial sermon at my home church, which where I am now. As a matter of fact, doing interim work. I did my initial sermon at that church the night before I went to court and received a 15-year prison sentence. But I was
Wow.
fine. I was great. It didn't bother me at all. All I wanted to do was get it behind me and move forward. And that's what I did.
Yeah, and so for people who are imprisoned or facing trials within the court system, what advice would you have for them, especially faith-based wise? What advice would you have for them?
Well, if they're facing some things, my first advice is to make certain that they confront the source. You know, look at how you got to where you are. And that's what I had to do. You know, you had to kind of assess your situation. How did I get here? Talk about it. I mean, you don't have to talk loud about it, but let it roll over in your mind. That's what I had to do. And once I did that and allow my faith to take over, I was able to be content. I was able to say, okay, I messed up, and and this is what I've got to do. I've got to accept it, deal with it. I want to accept responsibility. I did that, and I moved forward. And that's what I would tell anybody. Now, if something happened to you, you know you didn't do it. That's a different situation. You want to fight it, but if it's something that you know you did, then you just accept the responsibility. You know, be as humble as you possibly can. Because actually, I just believe that the darkest hour is just before. And if you can live that kind of life, accept that in your life, you will be okay.
Yeah, one of the singers I listened to, he said the sunrise comes at random, but it outweighs all the night. And I think that's beautiful.
Yep.
And Mr. Smith, one thing we haven't touched upon here later on in your life are two major surgeries you went through. And so now we've talked about people facing trials and situations of, because of their own actions. But when it comes to medical, it's not necessarily our actions that have brought us there. It can be extremely nerve-wracking. One of the most anxiety-inducing things can be any type of medical procedure. So can you tell us about your story with your medical procedures and then what you would leave our listeners with who are facing medical trials and tribulations?
Well, I had already served 5 years in confinement, and I'm out, remarried. And of course, I've been married now for 34 years. It was 34 years, July 21st. Two beautiful lady. We're enjoying our life and our retirement together. She was a retired teacher. But during this period after I'm out, I developed, that's been, let's see, 19 years ago now, prostate cancer. I had the surgery, but I went in to have the surgery with the same concept that I had when I messed up. Okay. I just felt like and believed that everything was going to be okay, that I was going to get through it, and that I was going to beat it. And be honest with you, I did beat it 19 years ago. When I go to my doctor now, and whenever I have my PSA, they cannot even detect anything. So I am cured of the prostate cancer. Approximately about 10, 12 years ago. I can't remember exactly now how many years it's been, but my wife has probably been about 50 years, 10 to 15 years. I I've always had a little curvature of my spine, and I love playing tennis, so I played tennis. And one day I went up to serve the ball, and I had a pull right in my back, and it would not go away. Pain just was awesome. And I went to chiropractors, I went to therapy, I went to orthopedics, every possible thing you could possibly do. I finally went to a neurosurgeon at Duke Hospital, and he told me that my problem was my scoliosis. That's what you know. He said that it was such that only way my pain would be relieved is that I needed to have surgery to have spinal correction. And so obviously that was a
Yeah.
really hard decision to make, but I finally did it with the same faith and belief that it was going to work out and I would be okay. I had that surgery. And now that was really the pain afterwards. I was taking all of the pain medicine because as you know, was healing, but every 3 hours, boy, pain would kick in. But I finally got through it. My wife helped me get through it, got me off of the pain medicine. She was the one who said, throw it away now. I think you can take a ibuprofen, a Tylenol, and try to ease it so you don't want to get hooked. And that's what I did. And after about, I guess, 4 or 5 months, I went back to my church. I was pastoring at that time. I went back to the church and and be honest with you, right now I have no pain. Only thing
Amen.
that I go through every once in a while is early in the mornings or when I get up or if I exercise a little too much, you will always feel this little ache. But other than that, a little stiffness early in the morning. But I'm great. I'm fine. I'm walking straight. No problem. Lord has been great to me. That's all I can say.
That's beautiful. And one thing I want to touch upon is your life as an author, so that anyone listening, they might be able to find some healing for their pain, some relief, and some wisdom through your book. So you can tell us a little bit about the books you wrote and, who can really benefit from them.
Well, I've written three books. One is Deal by Me, A Golden Opportunity, Blown, which is the first book I wrote. When I wrote that book, I actually did not intend for it to be a book. I wrote it while I was confined. It was more of how you start writing, I guess,
Right.
and just keeping up with talking about how you got to where you were. And I had written, I know at least about 300 pages. When I came out, start talking with friends and families, and they knew what I had written, and they said, "You need to just publish this." So that's how that first book came about, Deal by Me, A Golden Opportunity Blown. The title came from my poker playing, the gambling. When you didn't want your next hand, you said deal by me. And so that's where that part came from.
Right.
The golden opportunity blown was as a result of my law practice. I had lost that. And so I said the subtitle, A Golden Opportunity Blown. So that's how that book is. That's basically a memoir that shares my life story, my gambling, my law practice, and the ending of when I was called to pastor the church that I stayed at for 32 years. That's that book. A very good read. I've got all kinds of reviews on it. I think anybody who would love to read that will be very motivated, will be inspired. It's just a good book. I've got all kinds of reviews on the book. The second book just I just did that about 3 years ago, or maybe a little more, because I'll start writing it during COVID. I was sitting at the house and just trying to reflect. And one thing that happened to me during all this period, I got certified as a prison fellowship seminar instructor. And so I did some seminars and some prisons, even on death row here in North Carolina. I've been out as far as Kansas, and also was trying to go into places where I thought I could be of help to individuals. So I called to a place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where it was a gambling anonymous place where they had a lot of persons there who was trying to get over the gambling. And I knew I wasn't doing that anymore, so I wanted to go in and talk with them. And when I called the director, first thing he asked me was, "Are you still a compulsive gambler?" I said, "No." I said, "I have not gambled, played poker since 1981. That's when my crime happened." And he says, you're not a compulsive gambler?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, I'm not sure if the guys would be interested." And so I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we just believe that once a gambler, always a gambler. Same concept as an alcoholic,
Yeah.
alcoholic, not a." And so I knew that was not me. And so during the time of COVID, I started reflecting again on well, then what happened? How did I get to where how did I, went through all of this stuff? And so as I reflect on it, I wanted to do a self-evaluation. And this is what I did of my own life. Some people, might think that's crazy, but I really wanted to be honest with myself. So I did a second book. It's Deal by Me, second edition. It's entitled A Self-Evaluation. I basically just lift up subjects and titles that I wanted to deal with. And one of those titles that I dealt with was Don't Be Afraid of Failure. Don't be afraid to fail. And as I was doing my self evaluation, I came to the conclusion that that was more of the reason why I robbed the bank than my being a compulsive gambler. You see, I had been this outstanding lawyer, and everybody would tell you that I was awesome lawyer. I was young, I was aggressive, and now I was going downhill, and I just couldn't face it. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I concluded in my second book that that was the reason I did what I did. So that's the reason I called that Deal by Me, a second edition, a self evaluation. And in that, I talk about topics like you only have one shot, so don't miss it. The darkest hour, that's one chapter. The darkest hour was just before dawn. And I just talked to you about confront the source. An idle mind is a devil's workshop. Play with fire and you will get burned. Practice humility. Accept responsibility. Crime does not pay. If something is consuming you, step back from it. Don't let your circumstance be an excuse. There is some good in every situation, and don't be afraid to fail. Those are some of the things that I talk about in the second book.
Yeah, and Mr. Smith, now before we sign off here, one last thing I want to ask you, which is if you had to pick one Bible quote to leave us with that you think is important for everyone to know, which one would you choose and why?
Probably Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. A little further down, I think it says, in whatever situation I am, and I've learned to be content. I chose those because those two verses took me through what I went through. I I took those two verses and lived by them while I was confined, and it brought me to where I am now. And I will leave those with anybody else. My God also, in that same chapter, my God will supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory.
Amen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the description below, you can find the links for the books and for Mr. Smith's information. Please go check that out and share with anyone you know who might need to hear it. And Mr. Smith, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide. Through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side. As one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.